Hi, my name is Alexandre Kesh. I am the CEO and co-founder of Onchain Custodian. We are a Singapore-based digital asset custody and open finance service provider. At Onchain Custodian, we are continuously working on solving the digital assets trilemma of security, convenience, and compliance. In June, we are talking about this trilemma with industry leaders during 3 webinars. One today, 4th of June, and 2 others on the 11th and 18th. Today, our moderator, El Lee, COO and co-founder of Onchain Custodian, discuss with our panel about security and how the digital asset industry has evolved since the launch of Bitcoin 11 years ago. We are proud of being able to bring you these industry leaders today. Hadjy, CEO of Horangi, Rebecca Gott, Distinguished Engineer at IBM, and Jerry Li, Head of Wallet Solutions at Onchain. You can go through their impressive bio as we are gearing up for this critical dialogue. Feel free to ask your questions using the chat on YouTube. Our panelists will respond to them as we moderate them live in the chat. Enjoy the session.
Welcome to today's webinar on the topic of digital asset trilemma, specifically on security itself. I'm El, COO of Onchain Custodian, and I'm your moderator for today. Now, in recent years, especially in 2019 and 2020, we've really seen an increase in efforts around the world to regulate digital asset space, specifically in cryptos and stablecoins. Now, often in these newly enacted laws and acts, there are mentions of how licensees should actually operate in a compliant manner, adopting stronger security measures and encouraging interoperability between operators and vendors. Now, these points are actually what the industry needs to really promote trust and efficiency for both investors and operators of digital asset. Similarly, we're here today to sort of discuss the trilemma of security, convenience, and compliance in space itself. And today we have with us 3 distinguished guests from the fintech and security space. I'd like them to introduce themselves, starting with Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Hadjy. I'm the CEO and founder of Horangi cybersecurity company, which is a venture-backed cybersecurity company based here in Singapore. We do products and services that help companies secure themselves in the public cloud.
Perfect. And then we've got Rebecca from IBM.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Gott. I'm an IBM Distinguished Engineer, and I lead our private cloud strategy and development on our Linux One platform, and I lead our digital assets platform offering as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we also have Jerry from Onchain's Wallet Solution Division.
Hi, my name is Jerry. I'm the head of a wallet solution from Onchain. We're based in Shanghai.
Excellent. And to our 3 distinguished guests, I'll kick off today's session with one of the topics on many people's mind, just to give a bit of background. Could you share how the digital asset industry has evolved in recent years? What is reflected in the needs and demand of investors and providers today? Well, I think a good person to kick that off would actually be Jerry. What is your thought, Jerry, on this?
I think it's a relatively a fairly large topic, but I think I'll cover this. In from 2 points. One is the evolution of how people safeguard their digital asset evolving over time as technology. So basically, so if we look back from the very launch of Bitcoin, right? We are seeing, command lines, wallets, which is very primitive, and then we're seeing, PC desktop softwares, which is a huge improvement, not only from the product itself, but also, it gives you a visual look of, of how one looks like, and also, as technology progresses, we're seeing, mobile apps, which is a huge step forward. It's, suddenly becomes popular and is penetrating the market fast. And over the previous, I'll say 4 or 5 years, everybody is witnessing a boom a boom of exchanges and custodies, whether it's if it's a self custody or centralized custody. We're really seeing a lot of players are coming in to host centralized platforms. And also from a technology perspective, I'll touch base on that a little bit as well, is you are seeing different technologies being implemented over time as well, right? So we're seeing from the very beginning, it's a single signature, and it evolves to multi-signature, and it's evolving to multi-computational methodologies. And now you're seeing like a big giant firm like IBM. It's it's hosting their HSMs, and some other big giants are also hosting similar solution like that. So we're really seeing a development, not only from a product perspective, but also from a technology perspective. So this is point one. The second point is to touch base a little bit on the growing interest from institutional firms as well as traditional firms. So if you look over the past few years, right, you see the CMEs are launching. A CME is launching Bitcoin derivatives, right? And we're also seeing a lot of e-commerces, for example, Shopify, Woohoo, right? They are starting to accept stable coins or digital asset as one of their payment method, right? And also investors, not only from the digital asset investors, but also traditional investors are starting to allocate their assets, right? It's not only all stocks or all funds. They're starting to allocate their money, even though it's a small portion, into this digital asset. A great example or a great news recently, it will be the central banks are also starting to do some, whether it's research or trial or some experiment on the central bank digital currency, which is something that is unimaginable over the past, I would say, a decade or 2 decades. I would say this is a huge improvement, or it's a huge leap forward to the next generation of money. From investor perspective, since we're talking about security, I think what are the key elements that the investors are looking for? I think it's definitely a safe, a secure, a trustful infrastructure as a base. And on top of it, I think the compliance or the convenience needs also to be there in order to major investors to come into this space. I think from the service provider perspective, for example, like us, Onchain, we're Onchain custodian. I think the providers now are looking how to best serve institutional clients rather than a retail client. There is a very clear trend of a shifting interest from retail retail to institutional clients. So that's my 2 cents.
Now, clearly, one of the points you mentioned in your statement is that security over the asset is critical or of great importance to the investors, especially these institutions, right?
Yes.
So the way I feel it is that they are looking for enterprise-grade solution over here to fulfill their needs. So you also mentioned how IBM has deployed technology, for example, HSM solutions. So I'd like to turn to Rebecca at this point in time. Share a little bit more. How are the existing players in crypto space, perhaps working with IBM or other players, how are they dealing with the security challenge or the security requirement of these institutions?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So one thing to echo on a point Jerry made is it's to see more adoption broadly in the cryptocurrency digital asset space. you have to follow the regulations, and this is particularly true for any of our institutional players, investors. And so you want to understand what legislation is in place, what the regulations are, and then work to abide by that. Certainly, even outside of that, having a strong trusted computing base to host your digital asset solution is paramount, and that's been paramount with the clients that we've worked with. And so when I think about the challenges of securing your digital assets, I tend to think of it as kind of like a three-legged stool. One is controlling. If you consider the threats, one of the biggest threats is essentially it can be your own worst enemy. Carelessness or poor security practices, control around the human process. Second, we always have the threat of external breaches, hackers, and that's particularly ripe in the digital asset space, or can be, and then the threat of internal threats as well. And so we try to take a look at how we can best protect against all of the threat vectors across those three pillars. One, in terms of controlling the human processes around which these digital asset transfers can happen. We look at orchestrated workflows in a controlled way that removes the human as much as possible. Second, if you look at deploying your runtime environments, you have to be very closely look at deploying within a secure enclave, essentially a protected memory enclave that protects you from the threat of external hackers or even potential internal hackers. And then third, you need a way to protect those private keys, and you need to determine what your root of trust is. And in this solution that we have built on our Linux One platform, we have components that basically work to address those three spaces through our hardware security module, which is our root of trust, deploying your workload in a trusted computing enclave, an area of protected memory. And ideally, you don't have to change your code, you don't have to make application code changes to deploy into that protected enclave. And then pervasive encryption, essentially encrypt all of your data at rest and in flight. So those are the three, I'll say the three legs of the security stool that we try to sit on.
And what is interesting that I'm hearing from you, and part of that speech, is really the removal of human from the process. So still really, when we look at humans, sometimes they can introduce error into the whole process flow. So no matter how good the hardware and the software, IBM, Onchain, or anyone can put together, it's only as good as the processes and the humans that work in that process. And however good the companies could be, I think sometimes there will still be shortfall or things that the companies have missed out on. So I think the audience will also be keen to sort of understand what is the typical example of stuff that companies missed out on in terms of security and processes. Paul, from Horangi's perspective, when you work with your clients or in the industry itself, what sort of pitfalls or shortfall have you seen in companies that you deal with?
Yeah, sure. And I think Rebecca sort of stated this quite well in saying it in what we call is just people, process, and technology. And generally, most of the problems are with the people in the process, not necessarily the technology. Of course, those problems do exist, but the majority of the ones that we look at are actually people and process problems. But yeah, I think like in general, with most companies that we work with, they're going to be around Series B-ish size, so maybe like 100 employees in the mid-market sector, especially in the crypto side. And generally, their problems come from a couple of things. So one is like the basics, right? Basically enforcing things like MFA, enforcing like the right things in terms of processes. So like in your financial departments, et cetera, making sure you have essentially MFA, but basically double checks on any payment that's coming in or out, those types of things. Generally, most companies struggle with the basic stuff, but as we get more advanced in the companies that are completing certifications like SOC 2, you start to see the processes and people kind of mature and follow a lot of the security practices. And there we're working much more on the technical side of things, making sure that, again, as Rebecca mentioned, the development processes are in place so that, of course, we try to restrict as much as possible within the security guidelines, but if it falls out of the guidelines, there also needs to be checks and balances in place, whether that's a technology or an individual doing that. I think that's really important. And lastly, I think, the most important thing that most companies struggle with, and less so in the crypto space, but much more in the more traditional space, is just creating security as part of your culture. And I think, honestly, if you're a small company watching this, I think, it's the cheapest thing you can do. And the earlier you start it, the better, because we want essentially everyone in your organization thinking about the potential of them being the weakest link, or of course your company getting attacked, right? And if you can instill that culture, then you'll generally make good decisions going forward around your security challenges that you will face as you grow. However, like what we find is a lot of companies that have been around, even newer ones, they fail to do that, and subsequently it's a lot harder to fix later on in the company's history.
And it's interesting that you talk about the company's culture towards cybersecurity. Right? I think there's this notion of cyber resiliency, which boils down to, let's say, if the company gets attacked, sometimes the first line of defense may not always work, and then the company actually has to respond to and recover from the cyber attack itself. In your area of work, again, are the industry players familiar with this notion of cyber resiliency? Do they know how to actually respond to cyber attacks after the firm has been infiltrated or the first line or second line of defense has already failed?
Yeah, I think the general answer is no, they don't. And part of our job is coming to help them do that, right? I think there's obviously most people at a certain point will call experts, but to have an exact procedure of what they're going to do when, I think majority of companies don't have that. But I think that comes back to the culture, because essentially a plan is free. You and your executives can get together and come up with a plan of when you're going to call out outside parties, but subsequently what you're going to do internally if something does happen to what. And I think everyone in any business knows what their crown jewels are. I think it's obviously a bit more obvious in the crypto space, but understanding what's going to happen if you start to notice things that aren't ordinary, or something is changing, taking the necessary precautions, and then subsequently escalating to the right people, assuming the problem is worse than it may seem. And that comes back to the people in the process as well. So having the right logging in place in the system to understand that if something's happening, someone will catch it in a pretty quick time, which is, again, is extremely important in the crypto space. And then with the people side, I think, again, just the culture around understanding that there is a threat, and you need to think about it, and you need to be looking at things from a skeptical perspective, and whether that's your email, or whether that's the logs, or whether that's your development environment. Why is this random machine spinning up? I think the first thought should be that it's a security issue, and then subsequently can downgrade from there. But I think the basic thing is the culture, and then just a plan secondary. Even if that plan is call outside party, that's fine, but you should know who to call and when, and hopefully have that relationship established, so that there's not this huge long process, because most firms these days won't work, especially in emergencies, with companies that aren't already their existing clients, because of course there's a lot of risk there.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of people could actually get help from Horangi to make sure that they've got the response measure in place. I think even the simplest thing that they need to do, sometimes I hear from other companies that they don't even know. For example, in their Microsoft Exchange admin, right, they should at least turn on their audit log. And if you turn to some SMEs in the market today, they have no idea they have to do that. And without this log, if they were under attack, they wouldn't even know who has come through and what IP addresses and stuff like that. So I think it's important to get in place some response measure and make sure that the security checks are put in place. Well, that means that you could always go to Horangi for that, right, Paul?
Yeah, exactly. Happy to help.
Yeah. And on that topic, I think today we're talking about digital asset, and the basis of that is, of course, blockchain and DLTs, right? I'm not sure, Rebecca, what do you think? Can blockchain and DLT actually help in terms of cyber resiliency or cybersecurity measures. Is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I agree with Paul that I think some clients, are well versed in this space, but many are still learning the complexities and understanding essentially the best processes and procedures that they need to follow. And I tend to think that there's a stronger notion of cybersecurity, which is the way I think of cybersecurity is it's generally focused on defense against attacks or securing or hardening your environment to prevent attacks before they happen. While cyber resiliency is around focusing on minimizing the impact of or disruption if some attack happens to happen, and basically doing your best to mitigate any damage, keep your operations running, etc. And so with regard to, so there are many facets in how you can address that. And as certainly aspects of what we've built in our digital asset platform offering works to address that. But if you look specifically to get to your question, how can DLT technology be a component of that type of resiliency? You can certainly imagine scenarios where even if you're looking at a permissioned private type of blockchain network, that is storing, certain types of, let's say, shipping records or inventory, controls, etc. Having that distributed shared ledger across multiple geographies, different data centers, across the globe potentially, and not having essentially, it gets really, in my mind, it kind of gets back to what is part of the robustness. Why are people drawn to essentially what we first saw in Bitcoin around this idea of a distributed shared ledger? It adds essentially a source of trust in the fact that it's distributed. That is, to have any sort of collusion amongst the parties that are controlling that shared ledger is much more difficult than having a potential breach for a single administrator of a central source of truth database. And so in that sense, I think DLT technologies can be a source or one component of a cyber resilient type of infrastructure, in that you are better protected by the mere fact that this is a distributed shared ledger technology, that to be compromised in any way would require a compromise of, let's say a 51% type of attack. And so I think depending on what you are seeking to achieve, a DLT strategy can definitely be part of an overall cyber resilience type of strategy.
Yeah, Paul, please.
So I will also share a little bit about from on-chain perspective, like how we take measurements, or how we deal with not necessarily an actual attack, but from before the attack, or before, during, and after, how we actually deal with the potential cybersecurity concerns. So like I mentioned previously before, so we divide it into three period. One is before, one is during, and one is after, right? And we have measurements or processes or our methodologies for each period. So for before, right? So I think the before, the precaution, it's always the most difficult part, right? Well, there is not much that you actually can do, but but we are seeing a lot of security incidents from exchanges, from wallets, from pretty much everywhere nowadays, right? So what we will do is we'll really study the case, and we'll work with the security audit companies or other technology provider to really study how, when, what, who did this sort of cyber attack, and how we as a wallet service provider can prevent from the beginning. So that's before. And during our measurement, our protocol is we do have, it's like a red, blue army sort of like a practice. So we do have this, it's not a test environment, but it's a pre-staging environment where we have, two groups of developers, where you can say one is internal hacker trying to attack the system, and one is the group of guys who are trying to defend. So we do have that protocol in place in Onchain, so that we can spot a lot of potential attack methodologies, so that we can prevent so we can find out during our sort of like a security drill. And of course, after we will analyze the method, we will summarize with we'll summarize it to the key points to see what where our current process and what is lacking from the current process. So we do have that three-stage three-stage measurement, where we can say protocol to take additional security measurement.
So what I'm hearing is that you have implemented different stage environment, and as well if you different stages to sort of detect, summarize, and respond to different threats. Jerry, on that note, I really want to bring that back into Singapore's context, and one of the hotly discussed topic is Payment Services Act, and in it there is a lot of focus on cybersecurity and technology risk management. So could you share what do you have over there in terms of different staging environment as well as response measure to security threat?
Mm-hmm.
Are they all part of the technology risk management that you put together for Onchain Custodian? Could you share more on that, Jerry?
Absolutely. So I'm not a compliance expert, but I'll just share my experience with this wallet management system. So I did research a little bit on the Payment Service Act license and the technical or operational requirement on that. So first, it's definitely a risk assessment. So basically, on particular clients on their information from the information collection stage, we need to make sure that all the informations are sound and audited, and also from a transacting perspective, right? We are recording all the transaction logs, so that there is a very clear and a complete audit logs, so that whenever a audit firm is coming in, and we can pull out our activity logs or the transaction log within the matter of a few clicks. So that's something that we definitely implement. And also for any suspicious transactions, for example, that address is being blacklisted on some sanction list, we do have a pool of that. So once we detect any withdrawals to a very suspicious address, we will stop that first, and we will report it to either our clients or to the authorities on those activities being taking place. And also internally, of course, I think we do provide internal policy sharings. We provide compliance sharings. We even do team quizzes, right? We'll do internal security operational trainings to make sure everybody inside of the company or inside of the wallet group is aware of the security corners, the technology pitfalls, where can risks being taking place. So those are my experience, or sort of like my throughout the project of what I've gained. Mm-hmm.
Well, what I'm hearing there is the processes that you've put in place, as well as including quizzes and interesting stuff like that the team has put together. They all actually could form part of a standard So in the market, we heard stuff like SOC 2, NIST standard. I think they could help the industry to build trust and compliance. But this is when I also want to hear from Paul. Just share among the clients and companies that you help with, do they typically adhere to certain standards in terms of cybersecurity? Do they look at complying with the SOC 2 or NIST standard or any other standards that has been recommended out there, right? And again, is there a difference globally versus what is done in Singapore? Paul, could you share your thoughts and insights on that?
Yeah, sure. I think a couple answers there, but for MAS TRM, which is the Singapore's local sort of regulatory body for any payment service providers, you mentioned with the Payment Services Act, you know, a lot of people are trying to comply with this. The good thing is that, you know, a lot of companies like Horangi, for example, have built products that help you comply with this. But essentially what it breaks down to is what I was talking about before, which is people, process, and technology. And I think, you know, where a lot of people struggle with it is the people on the process side. And then subsequently, of course, the technology problem is compounded depending on the level of expertise or the size of your company. With SOC 2, I think generally, if you're compliant with SOC 2, you're going to be compliant with most regional or local regulatory compliance. I think it differs a bit once you get into ISO and NIST because they're a bit more vague and less focused on the actual controls. And just checking that you have a control in place, not necessarily detailing and enforcing that check, which is kind of what SOC 2 is focused on. But in reality, like what we're recommending most companies go for these days is SOC 2, because you know it's the up and coming one in the US actually, and like I think Gemini is one of the crypto exchanges that has SOC 2 compliance, but many others are starting to go after this compliance standard, for example, because essentially it really proves the fact that you're compliant because there's a level of control that's done in the measures. And it's a newer one, so it's more common to see companies like SaaS companies or companies that are providing a service online. So that's kind of the one that we see happen most. You still see people getting ISO, especially in Indonesia, but in Singapore, most of the companies we're working with are going after SOC 2. And the US SOC 2 is definitely the most common one for SaaS or any company that's pretty much offering anything where security is important. They're going after the SOC 2 specific compliance. And if you comply with SOC 2, generally you'll comply like with MAS TRM or the Payment Services Act, which is essentially points back to the MAS TRM. So it's a pretty good one to follow.
So coming from that topic of talking about standards, another hotly discussed topic that's really in terms of security and compliance side, where we talk about the hosting of private keys and user data, right? And often the debate is being on-premise or in the cloud. Now, what is interesting, I think, looking at Onchain IBM's collaboration is that they have we have a custody solution that is actually using HSM based on the cloud over an on-premise solution. So I think it'd be interesting for the audience to also understand why has Onchain and IBM partnered on a cloud solution over on-prem solution, right? For people who don't quite get it yet. Maybe Rebecca, Jerry, could you share a little bit about how the technology works and why you've chosen to do this over on-prem solution?
Sure, I can speak to essentially what we've considered when we've built our aspects of our solution in the public cloud. So one way to frame deploying or protections around deployment is an operational assurance model versus a technical assurance model. And many cloud providers today provide what I refer to as an operational assurance model. That is, you essentially trust that the cloud provider is not going to access any of your coder data. But in fact, they do have access to it, but under normal circumstances, they will not access that your coder data. And that trust is around aspects of any procedures that they have set in place, agreements signed between the cloud provider and the client, and then audit trails. But in reality, the cloud provider actually does have access to your code and data. You're just trusting that they will not access it for any nefarious purpose. In our HyperProtect family of services in the IBM Cloud, with the HyperProtect crypto services being one of the products in that family, we provide in the IBM public cloud what we refer to as a technical assurance model. And that is where we, as the cloud provider, cannot technically access any of the code or data. That the code and data completely is under the control of the client, and we have no access. And we do that through essentially the way the solution is built. We have there's no SSH privileges into any of the virtual machines or into the crypto appliance from anyone on the cloud administrator side. So essentially anyone with elevated system credentials has no access to that code, data, or private key material. And we can prove that technically through our architectural deployment and essentially how the solution is built. And so with that, with this technical assurance, that is a level of trust and control that the client now has in deploying their solution to a public cloud. And this, as you can expect, has been one of the inhibitors for many enterprises to move sensitive operations data to any public cloud environment. Is essentially that loss of control and potentially loss of data, in that data is no longer under your full control. In our HyperProtect family of services, we actually do provide that to the client. You are in full control of your data. We have no access to it. And so with that, it basically opens up options for clients that otherwise would not find an operational assurance model acceptable for their the policies that they are trying to meet, be it corporate policy or other policies that they have to abide by for their end users. And so that opens up a space. And I think Onchain looked at what we had to offer with our HyperProtect crypto services in the IBM Cloud and found that attractive. And I'll note that the HyperProtect crypto services is essentially is based on our Linux One technology, where at a core of that is a FIPS 140-2 level 4 hardware security module, where FIPS is the Federal Information Processing Standard. And that level 4 certification for that hardware security module means that if any tampering for that hardware security module happens, that tampering is detected, and the master key material that resides within that hardware security module is zeroed out, destroyed within 100 nanoseconds. And so you can be fully assured that your private key material, your master keys, that is in turn used to wrap the private key material, is fully protected, and you as the client are in full control of that key material. And so that opens up possibilities for companies out there looking to build a solution that is comprised of offerings in a public cloud model.
Great. And Jerry, do you have anything to add in terms of why Onchain has picked IBM solution?
Absolutely.
From your perspective.
Absolutely. So basically, honestly speaking, the IBM HPCS off-premise or say cloud service was an easy pick for us. It was an easy option for us. The reason why I'm saying this is over the past, I'll say, a number of months, we are looking for, you know, a enterprise grade HSM service provider, you know, to provide similar services. But we were not too successful of finding one that fit to our need. Right? I think Rebecca was mentioning two aspects. One is technical assurance, and the other one is operational assurance. I think I'll add the third, which is from a budget or from an economic perspective, it is making sense to use a cloud services over a on-premise solution. And I think the reason is pretty obvious. From a technical assurance perspective, I'll share a few points as why that we are choosing IBM's services. One is for sure the root of trust is on our end, not on IBM's end. So we do conduct those smart key entries where, you know, we keep our smart cards, right, and we chip them in, and we form the master key of that particular HPCS, which IBM has no access of. So we are safe. We are actually keeping our asset on our hand. So this is one. Second is from an integration perspective. We have been working with IBM for a couple of weeks, I think last year, during the trial of you know, using that HPCS, and we found that integration experience was pretty smooth. It's seamless. You know, it was that it allows us to focus on things that we need to focus on, right? But not, you know, things that we're not too we're not the true expert, so we leave that to the true expert. And third is, and technically Rebecca was also mentioning the standards. It's the highest standard of FIPS 140-2. That is the highest standard, I think, within the industry. So those 3 points really give us the confidence of choosing IBM from a technical assurance perspective. And second, from an operational perspective, is you know, using cloud, it always gives you a I would say like a convenience. From a convenient perspective, you know, you have 24/7 support. Well, whenever you're having some issues, or you're having some questions, you want to raise a ticket, IBM is always there for you, right? And we are experiencing that. And third, from an economic perspective, you know, building even if it's a small data center, right, or even a small data center room to host servers inside of that data center, it's not cheap, right? You are spending a lot of dollars building the right room. You know, you need to have air conditioner. You need to make sure the powers are safe. You need to make sure there is backup for everything. So it's not that for a company with our size, I don't think it's that economical to make that choice. So, but the on-cloud service give us the possibility of using some of the world's highest standard, but with affordable expense. So that's why, you know, that's my you know, experience or my point of why we are choosing IBM's services on this particular part.
So clearly, using an on-cloud solution has a lot of benefits, and especially for audience out there who are vendors, service provider, or institutions to think about, because essentially that cost saving, we allocated cost saving that comes from vendors or providers who uses an on-cloud solution. That kind of cost saving can be passed on to the clients or investors, right? I'll probably get cheaper, more reliable service without paying a high price. And I think that's something good for both service provider and institutions or investors out there, right? So looking at it, going forward, today we're on the cloud, and going forward, we need self-resistant solution and stuff like that. You know, just in 1 or 2 statements, I'd love to hear from you all. What kind of trends do you foresee in this digital asset space or digital asset custody space in the next couple of years? And maybe we can kick this off with Paul, Rebecca, then Jerry. what do you see in terms of trend in the near term?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we sort of spoke to and talked about a bit is the certification side of things. So I think you're already seeing that with very big companies in the space, and I think that will only continue and be much more the normal practice than just the big companies doing it. And there's so many different certifications depending on what type of business you're in this, or you may not be able to do. But I think like that for sure will be important in terms of building trust with the customer base specifically, as well as potential business partners that you may be integrating or working with, and probably be required, especially for some of the bigger companies, because there's a huge amount of third-party risk for those large companies that are storing large amounts of crypto or data in general. And I think a lot of what's going to be I think we money spent in all three of the people, process, and technology fields. But a lot of the stuff you're seeing is now sort of enabling the people to make right decisions. So like the product that Horangi builds is what's called a CSPM, or it's called Cloud Security Posture Management, which essentially helps companies identify risks in the public cloud, and then sort of as well as what's non-compliant, and sort of allow them to fix it. And I think a lot of people are going that way in terms of helping the people in the process sort of identify the areas where they're not compliant, and then subsequently fix them. And if you have the right process in place, you can do that quickly so that it doesn't affect your business. And even longer term, there will be automation around that, right? Like how does it, you set the guardrails, and then the products just sort of fix those problems as they come up, or don't allow you to make those changes in the first place, which some technologies are already doing that. So I think generally those are the things that you're going to see. And then, of course, as is with always technology, there'll be a lot of new technologies coming out. Subsequently, there'll be more security issues that are created from those new technologies. And people have to learn them, right? So it's sort of the cyclical challenge that we face as we're sort of innovating, right? And I think that's again, why Horangi is sort of focused on this cloud space, because we think it's the future. Whether it's crypto space or whether it's the sort of more traditional space, our tagline is helping companies innovate without fear. And subsequently, we're kind of looking at all the technologies that are coming out, how you can sort of use them securely, and then put guardrails and kind of security controls in place to identify those risks and compliance issues as they come up. Because as more technology comes out, of course, you will face more security and compliance issues.
Yeah, interesting. And that cycle of new businesses, new technology, and solutions to solve those problems created by new technology is what keeps the business going on. Rebecca, how about you? What sort of trends do you see?
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's clients will certainly continue to look across those three prongs that I spoke to at the start. Essentially, how to best control the operational workflow into a way that can thwart against any sort of compromise in the human process, and there again the best restricting the access for anyone with elevated system credentials to really give them the necessary permissions for them to do their job function and no more. And generally that means no access to the coder data that belongs to the client. So I think that will continue. Certainly with regard to protection of the key material, some of the trends that we are starting to see now are looking at geographic distributing key material through something like multi MPC technologies, multi-party computation. And the way I tend to look at the desire to geographically distribute key material is a little bit philosophical and a little bit design choice in terms of depending on what's important for your design solution. And in some cases, clients can decide that perhaps that geographically distributed key material is a factor that they want to pursue. But others want to keep their entire key material intact. There are very secure ways to pursue both types. And what I will say with regard to MPC, though, is that it does come with some challenges One is the endpoint key material is in the clear in memory, and the signing and orchestration is in the clear in memory. So one thing you have to be very sure about is that you are deploying in a technology that gives you a protected memory enclave. That is, you want to make sure that memory space is protected, so you don't have that as a potential threat vector. And then, you know, it's certainly, you know, if you were to look at our HyperProtect virtual servers, which has a very large area of protected memory, that could be one route for that. But in either case, there are very secure ways to pursue both traditional HSM technology, which remains the gold standard today, and other evolving technologies, like MPC.
Very interesting, right? And I'm hearing already how that resonates with what Paul said earlier on. New technology, for example, like MPC, comes with its own issues as well. And IBM has those kind of solutions, including protective enclave, to help solve those problems. So the cycle, there you go, right? And over to Jerry.
I think Paul and Rebecca covered this pretty well. I don't have much to add. What I'm very excited to see is that you know, now you see news floating around that this government is launching their own digital asset. It's called DSET, and you are seeing, you know, some of the bigger giants. Facebook is launching Libra. You see a lot of central governments are launching their own digital currency. You know, I don't know exactly what will be the future trend, but you are seeing the central governments are stepping in, right? That means, you know, it's no longer you know, small place. We're talking about, you know, this is a national strategy, right? Digital asset. Mm-hmm. And you are probably seeing, you know, a new technology, maybe from a government labs, from even larger multi-continent, you know, collaborative apps to develop a new strategy, to develop new technologies. Who knows, right? So very excited to see how this, you know, government, I wouldn't call it intervention, I see government stepping in, how to boost this industry. Very excited.
Well, it's like the whole digital ad space is growing. And definitely, as an industry player myself, I can see that growing over the years, and going forward, probably so as well. So with that, I'd like to thank three of you. Thank you again, Paul, Rebecca, and Jerry, for sharing your insights today in our webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.